So last class we were talking about the basic economic problem of scarcity, and we discussed how scarcity is a problem that we would like to solve, and we can solve that by basically making informed choices. Those informed choices require us to know our opportunity cost. We need to know basically what's our next best alternative for gone, and knowing that next best alternative for gone, knowing the benefits that I can get from the next best alternative basically helps me understand why I have done a good job in terms of allocating resources. Resources, we had a little discussion, could be your land, could be your labor, could be capital, and so on. And so all of these resources, they are sort of, they help us to make goods and services. It's a discussion that we will have in detail a little later, but these resources have to be used properly. So if you are somebody who is a worker, for example, you have a choice to make. Should I work for firm A or firm B? If you are, for example, a consumer, should I buy good A or good B? If I'm, for example, a government, I would decide whether I should build a bridge or build a school. So everyone is making choices because not everything can be done. And these choices result in opportunity cost. And analyzing those opportunity costs is important for us to understand whether our choices are good or bad. So that's what where we left off. So we discussed also, we discussed a concept of economic versus free good. We said economic goods are those goods which are basically ones that have opportunity cost attached to it. And the reason is simple, because these goods are scarce to begin with. On the other hand, you have goods which are what we call free goods, which are unlimited in supply, like, for example, seawater, oxygen that we breathe, and so on and so forth. There's no price attached to it right now because they are free goods, which is unlimited in supply. So there's no choice that you need to make. So economic goods have zero opportunity cost, and therefore, economic goods have opportunity cost, and therefore there is a price. And free goods are those which have zero opportunity cost and therefore zero price. That's also another concept we discussed last time. Now, moving on, today's discussion is going to focus on something called factors of production. What are factors of production? We say factors of production are what you call land. Let me write this here. It's actually written later as well, but land, labor, capital, and enterprise. So we use land, labor, capital, and enterprise to basically make goods and services. And these are the inputs that we know are also what we call scarce. So right now, when we look at factors of production, we need to look at basically what are these factors of production, like land, labor, capital, enterprise. What are they actually? What do they define? What's the definition of these land, labor, capital, and enterprise? And then secondly, we need to look at what return do we get from them. What's the benefit that I get, for example, giving my labor services to somebody, or for example, giving my land to somebody, or using my land for something. So we need to look at the benefit or reward we get from them. Also, what are they? And once we understand this, basically, once we understand what these are and what benefit they give us, we will be able to understand how to allocate these resources better. Okay. Before I move on, is there any question, guys? Okay. So the first factor of production, basically, so resources, let's just look at this. Resources are also referred to as factors of production. They include all inputs used. They include all inputs used in the production of a good or service. They are typically separated into four categories. So we have four categories. One is land. Land is what we call, by definition, can also be called raw materials. But land is basically something which is provided by the nature. We say it's nature's gift because we are using that. And land is a big category. The big category of land, as we call it, is So guys, when we look at land, land is a big category because in land we are including things like, for example, agricultural land or non-agricultural land, like these plots, these where we build buildings. Forests is land, pastures is land, like farm areas are land, mineral deposits are land. So land is anything which is sort of nature's sort of gift. It's something which is not man-made, and therefore it helps us to basically we use this to make goods and services. um, does that make sense? Any questions? So when we look at land, there's an important thing we need to understand. When look at land, we have two kinds of category within land also. Not that it matters much for our decision making, but there are non-renewable resources, non-renewable sort of resources, and then there is renewable resources. In a way, we should be concerned about the use of it, because from an environmental perspective, when you look at non-renewable resources, they are the ones that are basically used now and they will not be available in the future. So for example, when you look at oil or coal deposits, these are those that they diminish when you use them. You can't really replenish them. Well, again, you can't really build them again. The supply goes down when you use them. And therefore, the fact that they are limited in supply also is an important thing to remember, that once you use them, they are gone. So the world will, in 50 years or 60 years, will have a lower supply of, for example, oil and so on. While non-renewable resources, let's look at the non-renewable part of the resources. The non-renewable resources are those, I'm sorry, renewable resources are those resources, sorry, we did discuss, the renewable resources are those resources which are basically that can be built again. So for example, stock of fish, like a lot of times people say that, we should not be fishing during the breeding period. And the reason is very simple, because these are the goods that you can build again. Or if you're cutting forests for timber, for example, or for wood, you can build them again. You can keep on planting more trees. So it's a renewable resource. Does that make sense? So non-renewable resources are all those resources which actually are actually diminishing, while renewable resources are also diminishing, but we can, through positive sort of actions, through, for example, responsible actions, try to not let the supply fall below a critical level. Now, whenever somebody is the owner of land, okay, and that's an important point to understand. Let's look at now from the lens of opportunity cost. So whenever you're looking at land, the important thing you need to look at is that if you are the owner of a land, there is an opportunity cost. Let's say if I own a piece of land, right, and I decide to make a house in it, right? So I am using this land to build a house, and I could have, and I'm, let's say, I don't only have built a house and I'm living in the house. What's my opportunity cost? What's my opportunity cost of this action? Anyone who can tell me?
Sir, the land could have been used for commercial basis, something commercial.
Awesome. In other words, when you had given it for commercial, what would you have gotten then?
The profit of it.
I mean, not the profit, we call it rent. So there is rent that is foregone. Isn't that true? So we are foregoing rent in this case, and the reason why we're foregoing rent in this case is because we decided to live in the or to build a house in that place. So what is the opportunity cost of land? And we say it's the rent that you forgo. If you use it yourself, you have forgone the rent. But if you don't, for example, use it, you can earn rent out of it. So your decision about should I give my land for should I use it myself for my own business, or my own house, or I not do that and should I give it for some to somebody for, is basically dependent on this rent. The higher the rent, of course, the higher will be the opportunity cost, and the more difficult it will be for you to build a house, because you'll be like, I'm building a house, I'm going to lose so much in rent. I rather give it to somebody and earn rent and build my house in some other neighborhood, for example. I don't know, or rent a house and not build it. Make sense? Are we good? Are we good to move on? So land is the first sort of natural resource, and we learn that there's renewable and non-renewable resources. Non-renewable resources, they diminish with use. A good example of this is oil or coal deposits. Renewable resources could be those which can be, you can use them, reuse them, and if you can use them and then make sure that you keep on increasing the supply by responsible actions and so on. And another important point that we talked about is this, that the reward or the opportunity cost, reward or opportunity cost to the owner of land is rent. Okay. Then comes labor. But before I move on to labor, I want to know if there's anyone who has a question or any comment to add. Now, moving on, we now talk about, so we learned something that, like your options, basically your decisions basically will depend on ultimately the reward we're getting. The larger the reward, the more likely you may not use this property for your own purposes, right? Then comes labor. What is labor? We say this, that labor is basically, it includes all forms of human input. It includes both physical and mental inputs. For example, right now I'm teaching a class. I'm using my mental capacity, but I'm also using physical capacity. I'm writing. I'm sort of using my hands and sort of. That's one thing. But this could also be a mental, a completely physical job, like physical labor job can be also labor. And we actually argue this, that labor is basically the human effort in the production process. So human input or human effort, this human effort in the production process, right? When you look at human effort in the production process, we are looking at basically, it could be as sophisticated as a neurosurgeon, or it could be as simple as, for example, somebody who is doing manual labor. But nonetheless, depending on the quality of your labor, you may get a reward for it. What's the reward for labor? Anyone who can tell me the reward for labor? Exactly. The reward for labor will be wages. I completely agree with you. And so every one of us are basically working for wages. The larger the wage you get, for example, the larger will be what you call it, your sort of incentive to work. The more pay you get, the more you would want to put in hours. So what's the opportunity cost, guys? What's the opportunity cost of um, 1 hour of labor, if I can ask? What's the opportunity cost of 1 hour of labor? Anyone?
Low wages?
No. Anyone else? Leisure, very good. Maham Mohsin said, awesome. Maham, good job. Leisure is basically, in economics, we say leisure, that 1 hour of chilling at home, watching TV, hanging out, we call it leisure. So let's say you decide to work for 1 hour, you get wage, but you could have used that hour to hang out with your family, hang out with your friends, watch TV, and so on and so forth. So leisure becomes what we call the opportunity cost of leisure becomes the opportunity cost of labor. And if somebody asks you, you decide to spend 1 hour of leisure, like Amal, if you are listening to me, it's an important question, that if you decide to use this 1 hour of leisure on, for example, something else, let's say, if you decide to not work, but use this 1 hour of leisure 1 hour on leisure, not off leisure, but 1 hour on leisure. Let's say you decided to spend 1 hour on leisure. Then if somebody asks you, what's the opportunity cost of this leisure? Okay, so let me write this. What's the opportunity cost of leisure? So what's the opportunity cost of leisure? You would say, anyone who can tell me the answer?
Wages.
Yeah, you should say it should be wage forgone, 1 hour of wage forgone, right? So the working hour, that working hour, basically I should say working hour ke bajaye I should say wage. So money could have been earned, and that's an important point to understand as well. Makes sense? So guys, when you look at labor, we say at any point in time, we say labor is limited both in number and in skills. So there's a limited supply of labor. That's an important point to understand. Labor is limited in supply. There is not much of it. And we also say this, that uh, the total number of people available for work, we call it labor force of a country or working population of a country. It's an important term to remember for macro, but nonetheless, we should introduce this, that whenever somebody says labor force of a country, they mean all the people who are willing and able to work. Okay, so this includes all those people who are willing and able to work. And we also know this, that this factor is limited in supply. Not only it's limited in supply in terms of number, but also in terms of skills. Make sense, guys? Are we good? Last thing that we need to talk about while we're talking about this, we've already discussed this, is that the opportunity cost or the return or reward. Return and reward ko main baar I'm actually saying opportunity cost because that's the term we would want to use. The opportunity cost of 1 hour of labor is leisure, but the return or reward is basically wages. Whenever you decide to work, you get wages, and that is what you judge your effort with. You'll be like, okay, so this is like, should I work for 1 extra hour and get money, or should I use that hour to do something else? Are we good? Does that make sense? Any questions, guys? Okay.
Sir, does opportunity cost always leads to prices?
Option cost of wages leads to what? Sorry, I don't get that.
Prices. Prices.
Price.
Yes.
It's a price, exactly. So opportunity cost is a price. Wage is a price of labor. Somebody says, okay, what's your wage per hour? It's like price per hour. So wage is price. You're right. Okay. This brings us to the next. Are we going to move on? So this brings us to the next thing, which is capital. We say capital is man-made aid to production. In other words, we use capital to make other goods. So it's like, let me write this here, man-made aid to production. So we use capital to make goods and services, and it could be factories, it could be machine, it could be laptop. Right now I'm using my laptop to teach a class, I'm using my iPad to teach a class, so that's also capital for me, and so on and so forth. So anything, or tools for example, is also capital. So anything which is a man-made aid to production will be called capital. And an important thing to understand here is also the fact that money in economics, you should write this down, money is not capital. So money is not equal to capital. I wrote here. Why is money not capital for us? Money is just a means to buy goods and services. So money is means to buy goods and services. Make sense? They are not the goods itself, but they're means to buy goods and services. And that's why for us, and versus accounting, things become a little different. If you use in accounting, you say capital, they'll be like, okay, it's the money that you equity, or money that was put when the big business started and all that. It's actually money. But in economics, capital is simply those resources which are not nature-based resources, but actually man-made aid to production. Got it? An important question to ask us is that, okay, we know this, that the opportunity cost of land is rent, or the opportunity cost of labor is wage. What's the opportunity cost, or what's the reward of capital? Sufyan is saying interest. So capital's opportunity cost is interest, and I want to know why. Can somebody tell me why the opportunity cost of capital is interest?
Sir, the money that's used to buy capital could have been invested somewhere, resulting in interest.
Very, very good. So, in other words, who's this? Sorry, again, I didn't get the name.
Manahil.
Manahil. Manahil, good job. So Manahil is saying something absolutely right, that if you had that money and you could have bought, let's say you bought a laptop, you could have used that same money, for example, put it in a bank, and you could have earned yourself interest. The fact that the possibility of earning an interest was there from your money, you have forgone that when you buy that capital. And the reason why you do that is because hopefully you will get some in the future, you'll get some return out of it. But that return should always be greater than the interest. Why the return should be greater than the interest that you could have earned is because interest is like a risk less transaction. You just decided to put your money in the bank, and the bank will give you interest, and tomorrow your capital, your amount that you put in the bank, your initial deposit along with the interest is what you'll get. So the idea goes this, guys, that interest becomes at least the benchmark, or at least the minimum that you should have earned for yourself if you decided to put your money in a business for buying capital. Make sense? Are we good? Any questions? Are we good to move on, guys? So this is the story for capital, where we say this, that the return to the owner of capital is the interest that could have been earned if the money was not used in capital but given out as loan, or even given out to people or individuals, or given to the bank. The bank could have given you as interest. You could have, so like $100 could be given to me, or $100 could be given to bank, and we could have given you interest. Rather than that, you decided to buy a laptop and let's say teach a class. Got it? Does that make sense? Questions, guys? Are we sorted?
Sir, can you just explain this again? Like, I'm not getting that capital and interest thing.
So who's this again? Sorry.
Amal?
Amal, listen. If you decide to put your money in a bank, right? Don't you get interest there?
Yeah, we get.
Yeah. Or you, let's say you give me a loan of $500. Will I give you back the $500 plus your interest?
No.
Let's say you charge me. You say, "Okay, Ali, I'm giving
Okay.
it to you. I could have put this money in the bank, but I'm giving it to you for 10% interest, for example, right? Isn't that true? You could
Yeah.
charge me.
Yeah,
But
I
let's
can.
say you said, no, Ali, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you this $500 as a loan, because I'm using this $500 to buy a laptop and I'm going to start my business. So now you're using capital, your money, you're using your money to buy capital, right? Now this is what we say, that what's the opportunity cost of buying the capital? And the answer is, the opportunity cost of buying the capital is the interest that could have been earned otherwise. Isn't that true, Amal?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's true.
that's why your opportunity cost of capital is actually interest that could have been earned.
Okay.
Okay, now comes the entrepreneurship or enterprise. So when you look at enterprise has two aspects to it. When you look at entrepreneurship or enterprise, we say this enterprise is basically the guy who's you're sort of doing two things for us. Number one, he is basically organizing organizing factors of production. Number two, what he's trying to do for us is also not only organizing factors of production, but he's also trying to do the second part, which is basically take risk. And although organizing factors of production can be done by a manager too, but these two things we say is done by the guy who's what we call entrepreneur, who is basically the one who's starting a business. And the reason why he's doing all this is because he's hoping to earn some profits. Okay, so what's the reward of entrepreneurship? And we say entrepreneurship is actually a factor of production because it's a very, very key role. If you don't have entrepreneurs, you don't have businesses, you don't have output produced. Somebody has to take the risk, and that person who takes the risk then employs a lot of other people, but also he's the one who provides those goods and services to people and so on and so forth. So the entrepreneur has the role of organizing factors of production and taking risk, and therefore in the process the individual gets profits, and these profits basically are the reward to the factor of production. Okay, so when land gets rent, labor get wages, the capital is the return is interest, and for entrepreneur, the guy who starts the business, who's got two roles to play, like organizing factors of production or mobilizing factors of production and taking risk, his return is profits. Make sense? Any questions, guys? Anyone who wants to ask me anything in this context? We are done with the discussion, so I just want to know now if you have any questions. You know, this is a very important question that comes from here, something which once came in exam. Of all the factors of production, where do you see the rewards to be uncertain? And the answer is the only factor of production which has an uncertain reward is the entrepreneur, because this guy can basically do not have a fixed return. He may not know how good his return could be. In a way, that return will be uncertain. For all other people, the reward could be certain. Make sense? For an entrepreneur, of course, if you have two options, somebody saying for an entrepreneur, for example, you could gauge yourself that I'm earning profits here, but I could have sort of used my time to do a job. Maybe yes, but I'm looking at from an entrepreneur. I'm looking at entrepreneurs deciding to do business A. He could have done business B also. So there's an opportunity cost in that context too. Make sense? Are we good? Question, guys? I am done. Thank you. And I'll see you guys tomorrow, and you'll get the recording of today's class and tomorrow's class together. Okay. Have a good one, guys.